Hey everyone, welcome to episode 3 of the #AdStudents podcast. My name is Henry Brown, and for this week I'll be joined by Katie Rushmer and Billy Little in discussing brands that broke the piggy bank on investments that never fully paid off. Without further ado, let's get into it. So, Billy, would you be able to start us off by introducing us to your example?
Yes, so I took a look at one of the campaigns from 2017, which, according to the ASA, was one of the most complained campaigns of the year. It is, in fact, the McDonald's bereavement campaign. Are we familiar with that?
Not particularly, no. Do you know to give us the groundwork?
Yeah, so it was a TV spot that shows a young boy talking with his mother about his dead father, and it turns out that one of the things that they happened to share in common was their love for the filet-o-fish sandwich. Ooh. And obviously that epically failed because people were then saying it's not a very nice thing to associate with, and it was almost manipulative in some ways. What do you think?
Yeah, it's kind of saying sort of like a if you've lost a loved one, we can solve all your problems with a sandwich if you find someone else who likes the same thing, maybe. I don't know if it's just me that thinks that. It kind of sends out that message of, oh, it doesn't really matter what's going wrong in your life, even if it's, something really horrific like a bereavement case. But yeah, eat one of our sandwiches and you'll feel better.
Yeah, see, for me, it's like I can see kind of what they were trying to do. Obviously, they were trying to create a little bit of emotion, get people's heartstrings, but I don't think it was perhaps the most sensitive approach to doing that. And also, it's a bloody sandwich. Like, get a grip.
Yeah, no, I agree. It definitely wasn't very sensitive towards the obviously the emotive situation that was happening in the advert.
Do you think, though, in all honesty, the size of McDonald's as a brand, do you really think that harmed them as a company, or do you think it just ticked people off temporarily?
Maybe that would target a particular segment of their audience who, maybe has personal experiences with loss in the family. Maybe in that sense, but
Do you think that there's an issue there as well, because it's kind of justifying the consumption of fast food if you're feeling sad?
Oh, actually, that's a really good point to hit on, actually, because that can actually really play on some people's anxieties. And I think that's an unethical way to go about it, because if someone's feeling sad, it's sort of saying like, oh yeah, food will make you feel better. But a lot of people have issues with food and eating food, especially when they're feeling down or feeling a certain way. And it's very irresponsible to be playing on people's insecurities like that.
Yeah, because there's a lot of regulations put in place already by the ASA for food and fast food in particular. I don't think it was brought up on that. I think actually they pulled the ad before it could get investigated. I can't remember off the top of my head.
I was going to say as well, though, the campaign that you described, it does sound eerily similar to another McDonald's campaign. I don't know if you remembered it, but it's the campaign that has the little boy and his stepdad, and they've got like nothing in common except when they go to McDonald's.
I do kind of understand why they would choose to market in that sense, because food as a culture in general, all over the world, is seen as almost like I said, like a culture. Food is a culture. Food can be seen as like a bonding exercise. The fact that McDonald's are playing on that, I think, is okay, because that is the case with many brands and many cultures that involve food quite a lot. So sort of like cooking with your family or cooking for your family, that can be seen as a very much like looking after each other, you're bonding. So I do understand that standpoint for McDonald's taking that, because food can essentially bring people together and make them feel better. But at the same time, I think...
Because,
yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
Sorry.
But Cadbury's, have you seen their Share the Joy campaign?
Yes.
That's all about giving and sharing and creating friends and communities. And I think they do that really well. They're chocolate, they're unhealthy, but they don't do it in a way that's like, ugh. I feel like this McDonald's one's distasteful.
Yeah. I think with the Cadbury's one, the difference is that they're saying, like, yes, our chocolate can bring joy, but you can share it together. You can send each other gifts to make each other feel better. It's less about the actual food and more about the thought that counts.
Okay, so yeah, like it kind of ties back to last week when we were talking about particular causes. So it's more ethical because the fact that they're not like promoting their own products. Like they're saying that like let's enjoy the time we have together. Let's treat this as a social activity.
Yeah, that I feel like that's more of the message that Cadbury's brings about for it.
Do you also think that in the case of this campaign, that marketers sometimes forget who they're targeting and that's why a lot of them fail?
I think that could go for companies that have very like low investment products, like McDonald's. It's almost universal.
I think with companies, especially large corporations who have big spends in their advertising and marketing budgets, I think their creative teams, sometimes they might get an idea, think, that's brilliant, let's run with it. Not necessarily informed by research, or maybe informed by one small idea, and then it completely runs away from that idea, but it's, say, like the idea to spark emotion, and then they think, oh, what makes people emotive, rather than running sort of like tests as to what's appropriate or researching what's appropriate. Instead, they have an idea and they think, yeah, let's run with it. That'll get us sales. Let's just go with it. And actually, when it comes out into the public, they get backlash for it and they wonder why. And it's sort of like their creative, not blaming the creative teams, but I do think that sometimes creative teams for certain organisations can get away with themselves and get caught up in their idea, because at the end of the day, creative people are creative and they do have ideas that they want to run with and explore. That is just sort of like how the creative mind works. But at the same time, if you're doing it for an organisation, sometimes it's less about your own idea and more about what's best for the company.
So yeah, do you think sometimes focus is too much on the creative and being unique rather than actually reaching their target audience then?
Yeah, definitely. I think that can be a massive thing for marketing and advertising teams, especially when it's, say, like someone's come into a new position or someone's only just got a job within the organisation and they want to make their mark, they want to make their stamp on the company. And in doing that, they think, yeah, I'm going to do this massive, big, great idea. I'm going to really push it and everyone's going to love me for it. And instead, they are actually doing detriment to the organisation by sort of almost letting their own ego take over, trying to make their own stamp on the organisation and on that organisation's history.
And you see it everywhere. Like, you can just go down the street and you think, what on earth were they thinking? Like, that makes no sense. And it's just, you see it everywhere and it still happens to this day. Henry, what do you think?
I was actually going to somewhat disagree with that, really.
What?
Differing opinions? No, I was going to say that I can understand the fact that some companies may provide their marketing teams with almost like unlimited creativity, minimal oversight. But you'd think that for larger companies, any sort of marketing communications would have to adhere to their brand guidelines, that they'd have to go through rigorous testing, they'd have to get approval from the board of directors. So honestly, I would say that sometimes when you see campaigns, which, as you said, Billy, can sometimes appear completely tone deaf, I think that's more with an attempt to gain relevancy.
I was going to say, because it's got the people talking about it and it makes you remember it, even though it's completely crazy, pardon my French. It's got us talking about it and it's got us thinking about it.
Yeah, I do agree with that in the sense that some organisations do think, yeah, let's just hand it over to the creative team. And some organisations do that very, very well. But I do think they do have that essential research behind them. They have enough social awareness as to what is acceptable and what isn't, and that's why it's successful. So when companies tend to take a stand on certain things, it's why it's socially acceptable. Sometimes they do it badly, sometimes they're trying to support a cause and they get backlash for it because they've done it in the wrong way because they haven't done enough research for it. So I do think it's really important for organisations to have that sort of like social awareness of what's going on at the time and what their audiences can be sensitive to. But at the same time, there are those organisations who are very much, this is our brand guidelines, this is what we do, we're going to stick to it, and there's sort of like there's no differentiation, and that is where things can get a little bit stagnant, things can get a little bit boring for the organisation and for what people do. Yeah, so I do think it is sort of, you have to find a good balance between letting the creative teams take over and having things very specific to brand guidelines and research, because it can't just be one or the other. It has to be sort of a balance between the two. Otherwise, you're going to end up with something that can be consistent, but maybe a bit stagnant and something that won't really interest the audience, or something that's completely out there, nothing to do with the brand, and something that just isn't stuck with how the advert should turn out to be successful.
Yeah, because there's got to be a relationship between those that are working in the accounts, so the account execs, account managers, directors, with the creative. There needs to be a dialogue. Otherwise, this is when like this happens, and it's almost like a three-way relationship, because obviously you've got those in client services that are managing the relationship with the client, but also you've got the client services who's kind of the middleman, has to have that relationship with the designers to make sure that everything is running smoothly, and you kind of mitigate the risk of creating stuff that could be perceived as insensitive and lead to a campaign failing.
Yeah, that's why I think some agencies do really, really well, because they've got that informed research. They work on multiple different projects at once. So they most likely have an overarching knowledge between their teams of what is appropriate and what isn't, what will work well and what won't, because they have a lot of people going through it, working on different things, having different awareness of different sectors and different audiences, and that can help inform each campaign and each thing that they do for their clients, because it allows them to have that knowledge to do something that's more successful.
I feel like, Billy, what we were just talking about, I feel like that segues quite nicely into the campaign that I looked at, and I wanted to kind of pick your guys' brains on it. So I covered the I suppose the now infamous 2019 Gillette "Be the Best Man You Can Be" ad.
Yeah.
Now I'm sure you're all aware it was a video published at the start of 2019, and it was essentially Gillette saying, "Look, right, we understand that men are perhaps confused as to how they should behave, how they should hold themselves to certain standards. We want to help with that."
So you mean like between like stereotypical male stereotypes that men think that they should stick to, but some men like to embrace sort of like more of a feminine side, and go for completely different looks. Like, not every man is the same, and that is the kind of thing that the Gillette advert was trying to aim for.
Essentially, yeah, they were. I think they were addressing more like toxic masculinity.
Okay, yeah.
That's the thing. It's like they were condemning catcalling, harassment towards women, basically saying, "Look, this isn't how you should act."
Okay. So what was the backlash that they received from that then?
Most of the backlash was actually from men who basically felt that they were being preached to, that they were being told how to behave by a corporation.
Yeah, I can understand how that can sort of upset a lot of people, because it's sort of like especially this day and age, people are told that you can be who you want to be. There's all different kinds of people with different personalities, different likes and dislikes, and a lot of people show that in their appearance. And I think if an organisation comes out saying, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, obviously there's certain things that aren't socially acceptable and should have a stand taken on, but there is a point where it's kind of like, you can't, as an organisation, you can't tell men how to look, essentially. If they want to look a certain way, they can. That should be allowed.
I think to a certain degree, I don't want to say they shot themselves in the foot, but I think coming off of the back of the #MeToo movement, I think obviously with that, in hindsight, it does seem rather preachy, doesn't it? It could be seen as maybe alienating a large part of their core audience. Billy, what was your perspective on this campaign? I don't know how much you've looked into it.
Well, I haven't seen the campaign, so I'm kind of going off on what you're telling me. So am I right in thinking that they were promoting stereotypes of being masculine, or they were trying to say don't? So are they promoting a certain kind of man that you should be, or are they challenging that and saying everyone's different?
Essentially, at least from what I understood, was that they were taking a certain typically masculine behaviours, like, so for example, like fighting, or perhaps going after a woman who you think is attractive on the street, and basically saying, you're better than this.
Oh, okay, so it was kind of kind of challenging male stereotypes. Wouldn't that get praise?
I think a lot of the backlash from men from that might have been sort of like, this is a brand assuming us as a gender are behaving a certain way, when actually a lot of men shun that kind of thing. And it's probably actually fewer who behave in that kind of way. And it's sort of like, it's generalizing stereotypical sort of masculine, not masculine, I'm sort of doing quotations with my fingers that no one can really see right now. It's sort of like stereotyping masculine behaviours and generalising it to their audience, trying to preach it out to them, when actually a lot of their audience probably don't behave like that, and it probably doesn't resonate with them. And that's probably where the backlash came from, because the men were like, we're not actually like this.
I didn't think of it from that standpoint. My immediate response was that it was a good thing to do that, because advertisers have a wider responsibility of driving meaningful change in society. That was the approach that I was going to go about it. But now that you've just raised that other perspective, I can kind of see exactly how you mean there.
Yeah.
So that's quite an interesting campaign, Henry, because that's polarised my opinions now. I'm not sure which stance to go for. I think
in an ethical pickle.
I'm in an ethical gherkin.
I do have a little something extra that may change your opinions on.
Oh, okay, saucy.
So it's informing the like the kind of lore, like the origins of this campaign, if you will. So, based on research that I did from Procter & Gamble, Gillette's holding company, Gillette's brand value was actually shrinking. It was gradually declining up until the start of 2019, because they were losing market share to companies like Dollar Shave Club or Harry's. Very much kind of a focus towards younger audiences. Like, you see lots of adverts for them on platforms like YouTube, don't you? So they're going for a much younger audience. And this was actually something that the CEO of Gillette acknowledged in an interview. He said that Gillette was now the brand of razors used by millennials' dads. With that in mind, they thought, like, right, how can we like cut through all of the other like brand communications? How can we address millennials and younger audiences directly on?
Yeah, they probably thought sort of like, oh, what do younger audiences care about? Well, a lot of younger audiences care about social responsibility, which is why I think a lot of brands have taken on this kind of thing, because obviously there's a lot more information out there. A lot more millennials are able to learn about certain social responsibilities and whether brands should follow them or not. And for example, you said Harry's there. Harry's quite pro-LGBT, I believe, from what I've seen, sort of like in the world.
I think they're championing lots of causes, aren't they? Like,
yeah,
I've seen advertisements of them doing things about mental health as well.
Yeah, they're sort of very sort of like social forward brand, and I guess Gillette were probably trying to replicate that in a way.
Well, they have. Have you seen their recent campaign featuring the trans man?
I have not personally, but I suppose they've learned from their mistakes and they're moving on from it. Billy, what are you dripping onto your face?
Don't say honey.
Oh, it's a daily skin solution. I've got to keep my complexion, even though we're in a podcast.
Beautiful.
So, would you say, though, with all of that kind of backstory in mind, would you say that makes the intent behind Gillette's ad, would you say that makes it a little bit more sinister, or?
I don't think it's sinister. I think it's adapting to the market, because as a lot more, as you said, if they're trying to promote more to millennials, then I feel like the more millennials that are learning sort of like corporate social responsibility and caring about corporate social responsibility, they are probably teaching it to the people around them. So that could be things like their families, people in older generations that they know, and it might sort of slowly making up a larger part of their market. I don't think it's necessarily sinister. I think it's more of a practical move to keep changing with their audiences. Brands can't stay the same way forever. They have to change with their audiences. They have to change with the time. They have to change with their employees. Because a lot of the time, people look at brands and think, oh, it's just one overarching thing. When actually you think that brand is made up of lots of individual employees. They all care about certain things. And they might have actually had employees in the organisation that cared about something in particular. And so when this sort of move for them came, they might have found it slightly not necessarily easier, but more comfortable to move on, because there's most likely people in their organisation that care about the same things that they're trying to appeal to millennials for.
Okay, so in the sense of while like they're trying to be able to reach a certain market, they can really hone in on like a in organisation kind of culture that already exists. In a sense, so it's not just like, right, what can we adapt to make audiences like us? It's not like, how can we?
It's not trying
Can we essentially use our ethics to like inform how people view our company?
Yeah, I personally, I don't think it's sort of the thing of, oh, let's break into a new market because that's what we need to do to get more market share. Obviously, from what the CEO said, they were losing market share and they realised that. I think they probably realised they were losing market share and then thought, but why are we losing market share? And then probably the research that they did into that showed them why they were losing it, and they sort of thought, oh, okay, we do actually have to change. The world is changing. We should probably change with it. I think obviously it might have had a more of a profit-based outlook initially, but now more so it's sort of it evolved into more of a, actually this is better for the long-term health of the company if we keep up with how the world is.
I feel like there's also somewhat an element of luck. I feel like a campaign could flop simply by bad luck, but I think definitely what Kate is saying and what you're saying is that there's still precautions that need to be made. I agree with Katie. I don't think that the Gillette ad was intentionally sinister. I can definitely see where you're coming from both sides, but I do feel like there's an element of luck, and it's just so happens that Gillette might have been unlucky in that situation, because my immediate reaction to what you told me the campaign was about was, oh, that's good. They're doing something, to push forward new values and ideas into society. But then, yeah, what you said, I feel like there is an element of luck. Kate, do you have any campaigns?
Yeah, so moving on with that, this was something that happened a little while ago, but I still think it's a brilliant example of where a company has spent a lot of money on something and it's just gone horrifically wrong for them. So this isn't a campaign, this is an expansion that Tesco's tried to do. And obviously Tesco were very successful in the UK, still are very successful in the UK. At the time, I'm not sure if they still are, but at the time, they were the number one shareholders for UK supermarkets, and they had also had other stores opened up in other countries. Then they decided they wanted to expand into the US. So in this case, they wanted to open up a brand called Fresh and Easy, which sort of like summed up what the produce was for. So things that were easily picked up by consumers, and it was fresh produce, and a lot of it was cheaper because it was own brand things. But when they went out there, so they initially sent, I think it was 40 employees out into America, somewhere in California, to live within American society and culture, to learn more about it and their supermarket stores. One of the things they didn't really pick up on is that a lot of stores are very brand heavy. So American stores don't necessarily have a lot of own brand things. I believe Walmart does, but Walmart has such a hard setting in American sort of superstore culture that it could kind of get away with having its own brand things. Like I know that Walmart sells its own pizzas and things like that. But yeah, essentially Tesco's tried to have more of their own brand things for these Fresh and Easy stores. The person who was in charge of the project, actually, I can't remember if they stepped down or got fired because of it, but essentially it was such a big thing for Tesco's that the person who was in charge of sort of going into the American market lost their job for whatever reason that was for. So Tesco's spent 1.2 billion in expanding into the American market and lost it all because they had to shut all of their stores. I think around the time, to be fair, the recession came into play. So they were losing a lot of money that way anyway. So they were trying to ample resources, and it was supposed to be, I think, another 3 to 5 years for them to be able to break even in the American market and be able to carry on. But they didn't get that far. They just decided to pull all of their stores in the US and shut them down. That's why there's no Tesco own brand stores in the US, because they spent a lot of money and they weren't very successful over there, because they initially wanted to open, I think it was something like around 1,000 stores, and they only opened at 200 and something to begin with. But they weren't successful enough for them to want to stay open there.
Sounds all a little bit tragic, if you ask me. In fact, I think I remember hearing about that when I was younger. Do you think that was missed opportunity, or do you think they just tackled the opportunity in the wrong way?
I think they tackled the opportunity in the wrong way, definitely. I mean, something as clear as most other supermarkets don't have own brand things on the shelves. It's mostly all branded content, and then suddenly having a store that has all its own brand things, it's unfamiliar to customers. Familiarity is essentially needed for customers to feel comfortable and safe with the brand. And if they walk into a store and see completely unfamiliar things, obviously, yes, it's tied to the store itself, but if they walk into a store and they don't recognise the products on the shelves, would they be less likely to buy it because it's an unfamiliar environment for them? They don't feel as comfortable, they don't feel as safe with the products. How do they know that product is sort of approved by certain bodies that make sure the food is safe? And they don't, because it's not a branded content, it's not branded product.
I think that's also an example of penetrating a new market just for the sake of market penetration.
Yeah.
I mean, we see it all the time, we learn about it all the time at uni, of brands and organisations penetrating new markets just because they think that there's going to be profit there. And that's not the case. The product needs to be relevant, and like you said, it needs to be familiar, because if you're just penetrating a new market and just assuming people are going to buy what you're buying, it's not going to work. I think we learned, didn't Kellogg's try and expand into India, and they had all different flavours of cornflakes? Maybe that was a dream, but I'm sure they did something like that.
There are some very weird ones, aren't there? Like, I think it was in second year we were taught that Colgate tried to do frozen
Didn't they do
dinners
lasagna?
at some point during the 80s, yeah. Like frozen beef lasagna.
To be honest, I would have that. I would honestly eat that. If I can have a lasagna that makes my mouth taste minty fresh, you've sold it to me.
That sounds like something out of like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory.
I don't think it was meant to make your mouth taste minty fresh. I think it was just a beef lasagna by Colgate,
Yeah,
so people were probably very confused by the product.
Would you say as well, though, a possible reason for Tesco's failure in the US market, do you think that might have anything to do with the fact that they're not used to being an up-and-coming brand in a market? Like,
No, because they have. They've done it in other countries. They've been quite successful with some other stores in European countries. I don't think they did enough local market research in America. They should have started small. They should have, because obviously different parts of America are very different to each other. Like, each state has a whole different kind of culture and mindset to each other in America. And I think they should have started small by maybe setting up one supermarket in a state, and then if that was successful, building sort of like on that state and states that are similar to sort of like build that customer loyalty. I don't think they should have been like, yeah, let's just roll out 200 something stores with the same products in all of it, for that we don't even know is going to be successful, and let's just go with it. Because they did do a test store. They did do a test store to begin with, but I don't even think that was very successful. They went into other supermarkets and brought products from other supermarkets that they thought, oh yes, this would suit our fresh and easy brand, and then they just sold it, which I don't think was a very good way to go, because for one thing, you're not testing your own brand sort of ideas that they had in their stores. Like, maybe if they had done a lot more sort of like customer testing and concept testing of the people that were local to the areas that they were planning on opening stores in, they would have been a lot more successful. They would have maybe seen that potentially Americans in those areas were more used to the familiarity of set brands that they know. And then maybe once they've got to know those, like the Fresh and Easy stores, then if they rolled out their own brand things, consumers would be more comfortable buying their own brand because they've already known that they brought all their familiar branded content from there before, and that still fits with their Fresh and Easy brand. But suddenly this own brand stuff is cheaper, but it's the same thing. But they understand and they know the Fresh and Easy stores already. That's their familiarity with the store is already there. It's just there's unfamiliar products there that they might think, oh, I'll give that a go. It's slightly cheaper, but it looks like the same thing. They're right next to each other on the shelves. But I just don't think they did enough research into their customers' preferences in America.
Yeah, so like you're saying, like start off with like kind of enticing them in with products that they know, and then providing the own brand as a cheaper alternative. Yeah,
exactly. Sort of like bring it in slowly. Start off with something that they're familiar with, and because initially opening up a brand new store in America, yeah, sure, that might engage initial interest, but if someone goes in there and they see a completely unfamiliar environment, they might be like, oh, this isn't exactly what I thought it would be. It's not something I'm comfortable going with. I'm just going to go back to my old store that I used to shop at. It's sort of like they should have started out slow and been more like the existing American stores before they tried to bring in the own brand things. Because obviously own brand is very, very prevalent in the UK, and it's something that we're used to in the UK, and maybe they sort of thought, oh, if it works in the UK, it'll work in the US.
I suppose they also had to do some research on brand perception, because if they're entering a new market, people aren't going to know what they're about.
Yeah, so with everything we've discussed, and obviously how corporations and big businesses are more likely to invest huge amounts of money into campaigns that may or may not work, I'd just like to kind of get your guys' final bits of opinions on what they should really watch out for, like what corporations should consider when making high investments.
Well, personally, what I said earlier, I think research is very, very important. I think knowing what your customer wants and what your customer is familiar with is a very important thing to go with, because then you're setting yourself up for success. But at the same time, I do think that being unique and being different is a very important thing to do, because that's how they're going to pick you out from the crowd. Like, if you're going into sort of a market that has lots and lots of brands in, you're more likely to be noticed if you're a bit more unique. So, as I said before, you need sort of like that brand content. You need branding to be consistent and good. You need the informative research and sort of like social awareness of what's going on in the world, as well as the creative side of it. So you can let the creative teams go off and do whatever they want, but as long as it's reviewed before it goes out and that everyone knows that it's not going to cause sort of widespread offence or harm, or it's just completely not right for the market, so it's going to fail because no one wants to invest in it. What about you, Billy? What do you think?
So what I think marketers can often forget who they're targeting. And I think that is one of the underlying reasons behind why sometimes big budget campaigns can fail. Because I think sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes organisations and advertising institutions can focus a little bit too much on being creative and unique. And I think that sometimes the message can be lost in that, or too easily misinterpreted. So I think that there is definitely a need for an increased focus on what is right for their target audience before they produce the creative and execute it.
I think both of you have pretty much hit the nail on the head. And Katie, what you were saying about obviously knowing your audience, I think that's paramount. Because, again, as we said about the Colgate frozen dinner fiasco, that was clearly a case of Colgate not understanding their audience.
Yeah, or at least should have branded their food under a different name to have some differentiation between toothpaste and lasagna.
Lasagna Gate.
Yeah, and but like, you definitely think that any company that's willing to invest a significant amount of money,
like 1.2 billion, in opening US stores.
Yeah, well, but yeah, you definitely think that they've done their market research. Like, well, they understand, right, these are the places we're targeting, these are the people, this is what the people like.
I do think there's a lot of trust that sort of like the people sort of, I suppose you could say, in charge of an overall brand put a lot of trust in their marketeers and the people who do that research to actually do their job properly and not run away with their ideas. And I think that's where sort of teams have to be reviewed on what's going, especially if it's such a big investment. You need to know what they're doing. You need to know where they're getting their information from, rather than just saying, oh yeah, it's a great idea, this is brilliant, it's going to work. Because you don't know if it's going to work.
You have to know that what they do is going to benefit the company. So I'd just like to thank Katie and Billy for joining me on this podcast. There were some brilliant ideas and opinions shared. And I'd also like to thank everyone who made it this far. We look forward to bringing episode 4 to you in the near future. Thank you. Bye.